Without further ado, please join me in welcoming astrologer Taylor Jackson, who will be presenting the Astrology of African Empires. Taylor Jackson is an NCGR Level 1 certified astrologer and UC Reiki master practicing in the Hudson Valley, New York. She sees astrology as life's great syllabus and uses natal and mundane astrology to help her clients reach greater clarity, direction, and self-acceptance. A scholar at heart, Taylor loves exploring the intersections between astrology, science, spirituality, and religion. She prioritizes mental health in her practice and often collaborates with licensed therapists and mental health counselors. Taylor holds a BS in Science, Technology, and Society from Stanford University and an MPS in Global Fashion Management from the Fashion Institute of Technology. She's also certified in mental health first aid. You can learn more about her work at www.blacksatinvenus.com. I'd invite you to submit any questions you have for Taylor in the Q&A box, which I'll present to her at the end of her talk if timing allows. So go for it, Taylor.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the fantastic introductions, Celeste and Suzanne. I really appreciate it and am so thrilled to be giving this talk today. I have updated a couple things since I sent that bio in. First, my new astrology business name is Valora Astrology, and you'll see information about that at the end. And I've also moved to Denver, Colorado, where my relocated chart is much, much better. So just a shout out to anyone who practices locational astrology. It definitely works. But hi, everyone. Let me go ahead and actually share my screen. Here we go. Okay. All right. Again, I am thrilled today to present to you the Astrology of African Empires. Okay. Introduction already taken care of. We're good to go. So the first thing I want to ask you to do here, and again, I know I'm probably speaking to a wide variety of folks, some who know a lot about African history, some who maybe have never heard anything besides the legacy of colonialism and enslavement. And so I'd like to invite you to widen your view of Africa today. There's so much history that took place outside of colonialism's impact, and that's a lot of what we'll be exploring today with a little bit of colonialism at the end. But and specifically, even physically widening your view of Africa. A lot of people may have seen recently, there was an update to the maps that we've usually seen. So on the left side, especially if you grew up in the United States and possibly Europe, you saw the Mercator projection, which really focused a lot on getting the size and accuracy of North America correct. And so now they've released the equal Earth projection on the right side, where you can see the actual scale of the continent of Africa. And I bring this up just as a bit of a microcosm of an example of how much the view of Africa has been skewed over time, whether physically, through things like National Geographic, things like that, where it's a great time to just question those perspectives and widen that lens. All right. So today we're going to be covering two empires, the Aksum Empire and the Kingdom of Benin, followed by a Q&A. And there were so many others I wanted to include: Mali, Songhai, Carthage. I might have to do a part two, but to keep it succinct, we're going to focus on those two. And then my methodology, because of course these are ancient empires, some that started, in BCE, times that are around 1400. And so because of these older eras and a little bit of confusion or wiggle room about exactly what years things took place. So I'm looking primarily at Aries Ingress charts, charts of major transits. All charts that you'll see will be oriented to 0 degrees of Aries on the Aries Ingress of the year specified. So please note that the houses are not relevant here. These are not actual ascendants. So we're going to be looking at the positions of the planets, the signs that they are in, and the aspects. And then I've also taken a look at Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions to get a better sense of the overall quality of time as known in mundane astrology. All right. So as we jump into the Aksum Empire, the Persian prophet Mani said, there are 4 great kingdoms in the world. The first is the kingdom of Persia. The first is the kingdom of the land of Babylon and Persia. The second is the kingdom of the Romans. The third is the kingdom of the Aksumites. And the fourth is the kingdom of Silis or China. There is none that surpasses them. So again, to give you context of around this time, this quote was written in 277 AD, the Kingdom of Aksum was seen as a major global power. Now, so the Aksum Empire, it's said to have begun maybe around officially around 100 BCE. The time period I'm going to be looking at is from what I consider the establishment of the kingdom in 100 Common Era up to 900 Common Era. The region we are going to be looking at is modern day Ethiopia. So this is East Africa. And the Aksum Empire spanned between modern day Ethiopia, Djibouti, Eritrea. Some say Somalia. I'm getting different perspectives about that. Sudan, Saudi Arabia, and Yemen. So basically a lot of southern Arabia as well. At its peak, Aksum City had about 20,000 people, which is huge for that time period. And some major advantages they had. Number one was the Red Sea trade routes. And you'll see this in a map going forward. But they had an optimal position to control trade going between Europe through different parts of Africa all the way to India and Asia. They also were at a high elevation. So this city was placed at about 6,500 feet elevation, around 2,000 meters. And that gave them a really awesome area of land fertility, as well as just strategic, ability to withstand attacks. They exported gold, ivory, frankincense, myrrh, emeralds, all kinds of animal products, live animals, as well as enslaved people. Okay, so for the origins of Aksum Empire. So first it began effectively with the decline of Meroe. And Meroe was an empire that was basically in modern day Sudan along the Nile River. So Meroe was a great power up until that point. And a huge part of Aksum establishing itself as a global power was the decline of Meroe and capturing some of Meroe's territory as well. Now, a wonderful thing about Aksum is, and you'll see there's a lot of mythology, and in particular Christian mythology, which we'll go into because conversion's a big deal here. But so the people's known origins of Aksum is all about the Queen Sheba. And so there's a book called the Kebra Nagast, or the Book of Kings, that was released in about 1300, somewhere between 13 and 1400. But in this book, it describes the origin of the Kingdom of Aksum as Queen Sheba having traveled to seek out King Solomon's wisdom. So she travels up to find him and then ends up having one son, Melek, who was then elected as basically initiated as the first king of Aksum. Now, this is an incredibly powerful story, an incredibly powerful mythology for the origin of Aksum, and so its sense of divinity and divine kingship. Now, there is a ruin in Aksum called the Ruins of Dungar Palace, which have looking to date back to about 6th or 7th century Common Era. And so people believe that the ruins of Dungar Palace have been Queen Sheba's castle, if you would. Now, the dating doesn't quite match the story, but so there's a lot of questions basically about the spiritual mythology of the beginning of Aksum versus the physical time. But just know that this sort of sense of divine kingship is a huge part of the foundation story of Aksum with King Solomon and Queen Sheba. Now, Aksum is known, Aksum is known for its phenomenal obelisks and stelae. And so these are stone structures that were, again, just meant to point directly to the sky. They have inscriptions of up to 4 different languages because so many different people lived in Aksum at the time. And so the obelisks effectively, and even small pyramids, they mark the gravestones of major divine figures. So unlike the pyramids of Egypt, where there's the pyramid and the grave is contained within, the tomb is underneath and the obelisks and stelae are above. But either way, these are just magnificent ruins that I hope to see at some point in my life that have detailed inscriptions and carvings. Some were actually stolen by Italy and then recently returned, but they are just a phenomenon of their time. So as we move into the geography of Aksum, so here's the map, and you can see where we are in the context of Africa, so sort of the northern part of the Horn of East Africa. And here, this enhanced box here, you can see what territory the Kingdom of Aksum had. And so that South Arabian part, Saba, that becomes very important as we talk about the story here. But you can just see there's a large swath of this Eastern African territory that the Kingdom of Aksum holds. And again, talking about those trade routes, a huge critical advantage that they had was they effectively controlled trade throughout the Red Sea. And so one of the biggest things there, they were the link between Europe and making their way to India for everything that all the wonderful goods and spices that they'd be trading at that time. They had trade routes going into the African interior and trade routes going all along the western part of the Arabian Peninsula. And so I found this very fascinating because, of course, modern day, there's so much talk and so much dispute over the Strait of Hormuz. And so effectively, they would have been the ones to have controlled their, Strait of Hormuz times 10,000. They really had a lock on these Red Sea trade routes, and that's one thing that made them incredibly powerful. So as we get into the astrology, so we look here to the beginning of Aksum, and so I decided to pull this chart again for the Aries ingress of the year 100 Common Era. And again, Aksum is said to have maybe started about 200 years before that, but 100 is where you see it start to really solidify. And here, just noting a couple of key placements that we're just taking a look at. One is this Pluto, Mercury, loosely Mars conjunction happening in Pisces, and that becomes an important point as we look at future events taking place. We have this Uranus at 0 Gemini, and we've got its Uranus return taking place right now as well, and the Saturn in Scorpio. This early degrees of Scorpio, again, you'll see just keeps coming up in the astrology. Ooh, there we go. Okay. So one of the first great kings of Aksum is King Ezana. And Ezana is said to have reigned sometime between 320 to 360 of Common Era. Now, Ezana was a great warrior king and conquered Meroe, had battles with the Kingdom of Kush and the Nubians, but basically was one of those major warrior kings who took Aksum from, its own standalone entity to a major world empire. And so if we look to the chart of the beginning of King Ezana's reign in 320 Common Era again, against that 100 Common Era Aksum chart, you'll see number one, we have the Pluto-Mars conjunction, having recently taken place again. So that seems to be the defining theme of the kingdom here. We have that. We have Neptune aligning with the Saturn of the kingdom's inception there. And also basically in an out-of-sign trine with the original Neptune. And then we have this, what is coming up as an out-of-sign trine here with this, the country's natal Uranus and the current Uranus of King Ezana's reign, which is about to move into Aquarius there. And so you'll just see with these aspects, you can tell that there's just a lot of shaking up happening, especially again, this Pluto-Mars conjunction and heading into the country's first Pluto return, having King Ezana step to the throne. Now, a major, major turning point in the Kingdom of Aksum's history is King Ezana's Christian conversion. So very early into his reign, and this Christian conversion is said to have taken place about 324 to 330 Common Era. And so I've pulled the chart for a Pluto-Uranus conjunction that took place at 328, right in the middle of that time period. But in this conversion, so they moved from this traditional, these traditional religions to Christianity, which was a huge turning point in the kingdom, not only because of establishing this new national religion, it was the pretext for many wars that took place and also solidified Aksum's alliance with Rome, and especially in the Byzantine era, which will come up soon. But we see here this Pluto-Uranus conjunction, again, trine that natal Neptune taking place, this Jupiter opposing that natal Saturn, if you would, or inception Saturn, as well as this Saturn here, again, out of sign, but heading into this fixed sort of Jupiter-Saturn square taking place. And so, but especially this Pluto-Uranus conjunction, and I know many of you are familiar with Richard Tarnas's work on the Pluto-Uranus conjunctions and the Pluto-Uranus cycle, but seeing that aspect, this huge outer planet aspect take place during the midst of Ezana's Christian conversion lets you know that major, major change is about to happen. And so this was the establishment of Ethiopian Orthodox Christianity, which is still one of the largest branches of Christianity today. Moving forward, we then have King Caleb's reign, and that took place from 514 to 543 of Common Era. So again, so between King Ezana's reign and all of the major battles fought and the consolidation of the Aksum Empire, the next turning point to take place would be King Caleb's reign. Now, King Caleb was later venerated as a saint, mainly because at a certain point, that area that we saw on the map of southern Arabia, that was, of course, a highly contested area between many different empires because of those trade routes and because of those resources. So at this point, the Himyarite kingdom of Yemen basically had begun to persecute Christians in that particular area. And so King Caleb led a series of wars to effectively to stabilize the claim over southern Arabia and end the persecution of Christians there. And again, this was supported by the Byzantine Empire because of the religious alliance. Now, some key things to note about the timing of these wars and of King Caleb's reign. So again, we have this Pluto-Saturn conjunction that took place here. So I have this at around, I think it was 514 Common Era, yes. So we have the Pluto-Saturn South Node conjunction taking place here. That's basically in this broader trine with the original Pluto in Pisces. And we also have, there's a lot of this Uranus-Venus energy that's coming up. But again, you're heading very swiftly, only a couple of years away from the Uranus return again of that Uranus in Gemini. And so one of the things, so King Caleb, again, very strong warrior king, a huge leader as it pertained to Ethiopian Orthodox Christianity and supporting other Christians in the region, aligning with Rome. And another fun point effectively about King Caleb's reign and why we have these coins here. So a lot of historians have been able to date the reigns of the kings of Aksum by coinage. So this was one of the few places around the world, especially one of the few African kingdoms, to have metal coins as currency at this time at this time period. And so as we look to basically the coins, you can see the shift not only from traditional religions to Christianity by the headdresses that the kings are wearing on the coins, but also you can basically date the coins to see when each king was reigning, whose face was on the money effectively. And so we have here some fascinating coins of King Caleb, and some are in traditional, more royal headdress, some are in a style of more European headdress, but he again was seen as one of the major kings of the Empire of Aksum and contributed greatly to its maintenance and its expansion. So as we start rounding the corner, the turning point when we go from peak to the beginning of the decline of the Aksum Empire. So effectively, that Yemen, or historically known as Saba, but that area of southern Arabia, that highly contested area. So Persia, the Empire of Persia came back and reconquered that area of Yemen. And again, this was a huge deal because having both sides, territory on both sides of the Red Sea, led to being able to truly 100% control those trade routes. So once this is jeopardized, suddenly Aksum no longer has sole control over these trade routes, and that was one of the main things that keeping them wealthy, safe, and in power. But so Persia reconquered Yemen. There were two particular years of war, 575 and 598, when these battles took place and Persia began to establish their solid hold over the region. The fascinating thing is, right in the middle of these two wars, we have 589 Common Era, which was the Pluto return of the Aksum Empire. And so not only that, with this second Pluto return, the way the cycles even out, we also have a Neptune return. And so we can see here, again, the way Pluto has its way of building, solidifying, and taking down empires is just incredibly evident in the history of the Aksum Empire. We've also got this Jupiter at 29 Aries that is moving in out of sign to oppose that Saturn in Scorpio, and the Saturn in Gemini directly on top of that natal Uranus. And so we have Uranus activated, Saturn activated, Neptune activated. This entire chart is then activated in this critical Pluto return. Right. And I took a look at the Aksum, the Saturn-Jupiter conjunctions of the Aksum Empire, just to get a sense of how the overall energy flowed on a wider, more mundane level. And so from this lens, we have in the early stages, that 100 BCE, that Jupiter-Saturn conjunction happened in 19 Scorpio. As the empire began, we move into 25 Leo, but into the fire signs. So then we've got the fire signs from that 100 common era up until this one in 312. All the conjunctions had that earth cycle, so they moved from fire into earth. And what I found very fascinating is that turning point that happened with King Ezana's Christian conversion happened here again between his reign in 320 to 360 common era. The Saturn-Jupiter conjunctions moved into air for the first time in the year 332, which again is only basically anywhere between 8 and 2 years after King Ezana's Christian conversion. And so not only with that conversion, but there was this massive spreading of this idea. And so the energy of the empire really aligned with the shift in the Saturn-Jupiter conjunctions to have this airy energy going into Libra and moving through the conjunctions in air. As you continued on, again, we had mostly air, one conjunction, the elemental kickback back in Taurus, but another huge turning point that took place was the beginning of the decline of the Kingdom of Aksum, happened again around this time period of 578 or 575 Common Era. And in 571, we have the first conjunction in the element of water. So you can really see and track the rise, the peak, and the decline of the Aksum Empire along with the Saturn-Jupiter conjunctions and their elemental correspondences. And again, I find this conjunction in particular very fascinating, knowing that it aligns almost exactly with that Saturn in Scorpio in 100 CE, and then in that trine with the Pluto in Pisces. So this very beginning and very ending in water, along with Pluto, it's the country's natal Pluto being in Pisces, just has a fascinating elemental component. Okay. And just before we pivot into Benin, leaving you with some beautiful imagery of the Kingdom of Aksum, just the visuals, the construction, the ruins. It's a phenomenal empire to look into and to see everything they were able to accomplish artistically as well. Here we have St. George's Rock-hewn Church, and you can see the little white figures on the screen. There are people in robes going to pay their respects. And so you can just see the scale and the technical ability of the construction that was done in the empire at this time. These are phenomenal feats of human accomplishment. Okay. And now we pivot to the Kingdom of Benin. So moving into Benin, so I open with a quote from a Portuguese ship captain made in 1691, where this captain who traveled to Nigeria, Nigeria is where the Kingdom of Benin is, traveled to Nigeria and noted, "Great Benin, where the king resides, is larger than Lisbon. All the streets run straight and as far as the eye can see. The houses are large, especially that of the king, which is richly decorated and has fine columns. The city is wealthy and industrious. It is so well governed that theft is unknown and the people live in such security that they have no doors to their houses." Okay. So moving to the Kingdom of Benin, the overall time period in which we see the Kingdom of Benin is that 1200 to 1897. And 1897 is very specific for a reason. We'll get to that. The region is in modern-day Nigeria, and so I want to make one thing very clear. There is a current modern Republic of Benin that is also in West Africa, and that is not where this kingdom was placed. This kingdom is in the Edo state of Nigeria, in Benin City, in the interior of Nigeria and West Africa. So just keep that, they are linked culturally, but keep it in mind that they are different places. Now, at its peak, Benin City held 80 to 100,000 people, which again, incredibly massive at that time. So even as you saw from that account from the ship captain in Lisbon, this would be like, I don't know, going from San Diego to getting to New York, to landing in New York City in another country and having no idea that this was there. This was a huge metropolis, absolutely bustling. So advantages there they had as well, lots of trade, again, access to the interior of Nigeria, access to trade with Europeans to the sea, and vast military strength. And main exports, we had gold, ivory, pepper, artwork, fabric, and enslaved people. And I also want to make a note here because we do talk about, of course, enslaved people in this particular presentation, but slavery in Africa, very different from slavery in America and the colonies. That is something to research at a later time, but just to note that as you know, judgments form in your mind or thoughts form in your mind around this topic. So, the beginning of the Kingdom of Benin, we have the Edo people and the Ogiso Sky Kings. And so a main theme here. So the Edo people are said to have relocated to the lush tropical rainforests of interior Nigeria and have settled there as a people. Now, the Sky Kings, the legends of the beginning of the Kingdom of Benin, basically it is said to have started with Ogiso Igodo, who descended from the heavens to establish order among the Edo people. And again, so similar to that Kingdom of Aksum, there is a divine mythology around the beginning of the royal line and the royal lineage of the Kingdom of Benin. So the Ogisos ruled for many generations, and these are all in oral accounts, but they list up to 31 rulers in the dynasty. Now, how we transition from the Ogiso to the Oba, and the Oba is the modern king, and the king during the Benin Empire. So there was said to have been a period of crisis following the end of the Ogiso dynasty, during which the Edo people invited Prince Oramian from the Yoruba kingdom of Ife to come and restore order. And so this prince eventually departed, but his son Eweka became the first Oba and founded the dynasty that continues to this day. And so the Oba, the king of Benin, is effectively not only an earthly ruler, but is also said to have been imbued with divine and celestial power as well. And this becomes very important as we move through the history of this kingdom. To contextualize this geographically, we have, again, so now we have moved into West Africa, and we have Nigeria, the Edo state, and the Kingdom of Benin. And so you could see in the cutout of the map, there is a huge swath of territory that Benin controls, but especially that coastline, again, with that access to trade, and expanding deeply into the African interior, where they were able to have access to incredible amounts of vast natural resources for trade and consumption. Okay. So again, we see that the Kingdom of Benin is said to have originated again around that 1000 Common Era period. It isn't until about 1440 when we get the establishment of Imperial Benin. And this comes with the first Oba, not the first, but the first Oba of Imperial Benin, Eware the Great. And so Eware the Great reigned from 1440 to 1473 Common Era, and his name translates to "the trouble has ceased." So effectively, there were several different types of leadership existing in the empire at that time. And Oba Eware was able to strip the other titles of that leadership, consolidate all the leadership under the single Oba, and basically maintain sole authority over the Kingdom of Benin. He also established hereditary monarchy, conquered neighboring towns, and established the great city of Iya. So again, this city that we're talking about, this massive metropolis, was established by Eware the Great. Now, a couple things about Eware. So huge things, one of the biggest things that he initiated or basically further fueled was the artistic exports. So bronze casts of the Benin bronzes, ivory carvings. He very, very much was dedicated to the artistry and the artisans of Benin and funded them, so they were highly patroned. So basically, I'm using the chart of the beginning of his reign as the sort of established chart of the Benin Empire. And so Imperial Benin. And so we have here this Uranus at 29 degrees heading into, of course, Uranus in Gemini, which again, we see as a theme today. We see as a theme in the Aksum Empire. This 0 Gemini point is just so concentrated and potent for all of these organizations. We have this Pluto here in Cancer at 17 degrees, also pretty much in a trine with the Aksum Pluto in Pisces. And then we've got this Jupiter in Aquarius and the Neptune and North Node conjunction in Virgo over here. Again, a bit of an outer sign opposition there. So to share a bit more information here about Benin City, these are illustrations of the Benin City, which was known for its massive walls. So at one point, the walls were about 4 times longer than the Great Wall of China and consumed 100 times more material than pyramids of Cheops. And so these massive walls were effectively built to manage the flow of people in and outside of the city. And they were built according to fractal design. And so, but with fractal design, that meant that a room inside of a house was the same design and shape as the house itself, was then the same design and shape as a neighborhood, progressively moving out in this fractal design. Mathematician Ron Eglash said when Europeans first came to Africa, they considered the architecture very disorganized and thus primitive. It never occurred to them that the Africans might have been using a form of mathematics that they hadn't even discovered yet. So very, very strong correlations with math, with celestial divinity, with astrology in the Benin Kingdom here. Here are just some examples of the fine Benin bronzes. And so these are brass castings as well as ivory carvings. And so we have a warrior king on the left side, we have a queen mother on the right, and you can just see the intricacy and detail of the artworks made in this early time period. So as we move further into the peak of the city of Benin, the Kingdom of Benin, we have Oba Esigi. And Oba Esigi reigned from 1504 to 1550, and which during that time we had a Jupiter-Saturn-Neptune conjunction take place. So Oba Esigi is celebrated as one of Benin's greatest warrior kings, and his reign was marked by the expansion of the kingdom as well as major administrative reforms. And he was also the first Oba to establish diplomatic relations with a European country. So again, we're getting close to that time period where we're starting to get to the 1600s and more of the involvement of Europe. And again, fascinating things here. A Saturn-Neptune-Jupiter conjunction during Oba Esigi's reign. Another thing before I forget, because this is so exciting, I'm looking more into it, but it is said that Oba Esigi was a very talented astrologer and tracked the heavens and tracked celestial patterns in order to make major decisions, which would totally track with his success. But so here we also have a Pluto opposition here at 15 Capricorn opposite that the inception Pluto at 17 Cancer. We've got an exact Uranus return taking place again at 29 Taurus. And then again, over here, this Saturn, Neptune, Jupiter conjunction is in opposition with that inception's Neptune and North Node conjunction. So again, we're seeing major outer planetary transits at the time of these just turning points in the Empire of Benin. Now, a turning point for the negative as we start to go over that peak and start to initiate this decline, if you would. Now, the Benin Kingdom Civil War. So this began, one of the major things that actually precipitated this was some of the main exports of Benin before, this ivory, this pepper, all of these things, those could be centrally controlled by the Obas of Benin. Now we had this increasing cloth trade. And cloth was way more decentralized. This could have all sorts of small manufacturers. And so you had much smaller segments of the kingdom being able to generate their own income, form their own trade relationships, and effectively undermine the rule of the central authority of the Kingdom of Benin. And so here you have these, you have lots of succession disputes and infighting that is taking place here during this Benin Kingdom Civil War. And so one of the reasons I wanted to highlight this, actually we'll look at the astrology first, but here we see during the Civil War, I've pulled the beginning of the war at 1689 Common Era. During the Civil War, you can see that Pluto return taking place. So again, we've got these major turning points in empire. You have the Uranus return taking place at the same time. Also the Jupiter return, soon to oppose that natal Neptune. And then you've got a Saturn opposition taking place. Also with this Mars opposite the Pluto return, activating all of that with just this the aggressive Mars energy. So here I bring this up because, yes, we are waiting until 1897 to see the official demise of the Benin Kingdom. And so there's just dispute among historians as to whether or not the decline began during the Civil War or shortly before 1897. And once I looked at the astrology, I would say from this perspective, I would argue that the dissolution and the decline of the kingdom began with this civil war. as we move closer to modern times, so effectively we have this Berlin Conference, and I mention this because, so this Berlin Conference takes place November 1884 through February of 1885. Now, at the Berlin Conference, what took place was that all of the European colonial powers gathered together in these conference rooms to effectively divide up Africa. They decided to agree with each other who would take what portions and colonize Africa in this way. And so you've got these colonial powers again that before you had the Portuguese in Nigeria, you had the British, you had just all different kinds of trade, different people moving within the continent. And so at this point, this is when the Europeans got together and decided, I guess, how they would split up the grand cake of Africa, which is again incredibly terrible and dehumanizing, but it is history. And so I bring this up because, so at the time, and this chart I'll explain here, at the time of the Berlin Conference, which is on the inner wheel of this chart here, we have this Pluto at 1 degree Gemini and Uranus at 1 degree of Libra. This chart outside is actually the Uranus-Pluto trine that is coming up next month on July 18th. Well, the first one, we'll hit a couple times, but this Uranus-Pluto trine that we're about to experience effectively has Uranus here at 4 degrees of Gemini and Pluto at 4 degrees of Aquarius, which within a 3-degree orb forms a grand Pluto-Uranus air trine with the trine that took place during the Berlin Conference of 1884. And so I'll share this because there is a lot of modern discussion about things that took place with this Berlin Conference and subsequent actions that just so happens to be brought up in recent years from 2016 till now that this chart really is emphasizing. There was also the Saturn-Neptune conjunction, recent conjunction over here in Aries. So going back to our Benin Empire history. So the Berlin Conference effectively paved the way for England to establish its claim over Nigeria, to say that this is going to be our territory, no other European powers will be there, and they decided in that moment effectively that emboldened them to move forward and taking more aggressive action to take over Nigeria. So effectively what took place, there were a number, that basically the OPA at the time, OPA Overamen. So OPA Overamen had been given some trade agreements, some proposed options to sign with England, and he was not amenable to being kind of locked into these really unfavorable trade agreements. So he was pushing back on colonial power, pushing back on England. And so effectively England decided to ramp up efforts to start to take over Benin. They led an expedition that was actually in 1896, effectively. They led an expedition to go into Benin, and the Oba's allies effectively tipped him off about what was taking place. So this first smaller England expedition, which debate remains whether or not it was peaceful, but it seems very much like it was not. But this first smaller expedition ended up, the warriors of Benin effectively just completely took out that expedition and deleted everybody who was involved in it. So unfortunately, this was then called, sensationalized in the press as the massacre near Benin. And that is what then gave the English, and effectively English explorers and colonizers, they petitioned to the royal crown to have more resources to, as retribution, violently take over the Kingdom of Benin. And so then, on February 17th, 1897, the British unleashed what they called the Punitive Expedition. Again, in more watered down history, this is renamed as the Benin Expedition, but it was called punitive at the time to punish Benin for what happened with that previous expedition. So in this punitive expedition, they deposed the Oba, they raided the city, destroyed just about everything they could find in terms of architecture, structure, resources, etc., and also looted that vast amount of beautiful artwork in Benin. And so this punitive expedition took place. Again, here we go with that Saturn-Uranus conjunction, especially here, out of sign here in Sag and Scorpio, but that recently took place. But this being in this Uranus opposition to the 29-degree Taurus Uranus in the inception of Imperial Benin. It also took place during this Pluto-Mars-Neptune conjunction here in Gemini. And the presence of Neptune speaks a lot to me here because there was so much deception around whether it was the trade agreements Britain was proposing, the reasoning for going into Benin, saying again this was retribution, just this very incensed reason of belief of why they felt they could take over the Kingdom of Benin. And so we have that there, and this is in, again, a sort of a bit wider of an orb, but in a recent square to the natal Neptune and north node of the Kingdom of Benin. And so here we have an image. This photo was effectively taken after one of the palace lootings. And so all of these Benin bronze plaques, all of these artworks, you can clearly see England was not hiding the fact that they took these items. Here I found a flyer basically that was advertised in about 1907, ethnological specimens, so selling artwork from Benin, Congo, New Guinea, Egyptian and Roman figures, things from all over the world. It was very well known. There were very, very, very public auctions of the stolen Benin artworks, and this becomes very relevant with some of the modern day astrology. Also, I just went online and saw this on Cherish for sale right now. But this was a Benin artist sculpture of a head, early 1900s. Again, so right next to that 1897 time period, these Benin artworks are just circulating. They're in Western museums all across Europe, all across America, and just circulating as being sold in modern day. Now, as we circle back to modern day, we have Oba Eware II. Now, this, I think, was probably the most fascinating part of the research that I did for this presentation. But remember that Oba Eware I in that 1440 time period was the one to establish Imperial Benin, to build the city of Iya, and to effectively finance and patronize all the artists and artisans who were doing the bronze castings, the ivory carvings, the artworks that Benin is famous for. So Oba Eware II, his reign began October 20th, 2016. And this casting here next to him is a casting of Oba Eware I. And so these are the royal garb, the coral beads that are known with the Oba of Benin. But these two charts compare the beginning of Oba Eware I's reign and the beginning of Oba Eware II's reign. So first, Oba Eware I, this Pluto-Mars conjunction in Cancer. Eware II, Pluto-Mars conjunction in Capricorn in an almost perfect Pluto opposition. Oba Eware I, Neptune North Node here in Virgo, early degrees of Virgo. Oba Eware II, a nodal return, and Neptune in early degrees of Pisces. And then we have this Uranus here in Aries, which is basically forming, this Uranus at 22 degrees of Aries is forming again with a wider orb, but again, we're talking about historical transits here, but it's forming a wide orb to a cardinal T-square with this Pluto opposition. So again, there are many thoughts about whether or not people get reincarnated, but based on the actions of this Oba, I would say if he's not a reincarnation of Oba Eware I, he is deeply, deeply connected to his spirit. But here, especially with this Uranus T-square to this Pluto opposition, ready to shake things up, ready to change things, ready to bring that Plutonian energy all the way around. And so again, Oba Eware II's reign began in October 2016. And as we move here, we have a modern movement to repatriate the Benin bronzes and looted artifacts for the European countries that have these stolen artifacts to give them back to Benin. And so it's like Nigeria's called for the return of the Benin bronzes. These calls began in about 1930, and they effectively fell on deaf ears until about 2007, when there was a Benin dialogue group established to go from just outright demands to starting conversations to begin these to negotiate in a different way to get these looted artifacts back. But what is fascinating is after 2017, when Oba Eware II came to power, that is when true progress began, and the first stolen Benin bronzes began to be returned in 2022. And so again, it is fascinating to me that Oba Eware II would be so connected to Eware I, who was one of the main reasons that the bronzes existed in the first place through his government patronage. Another thing about this is, so in the modern debate about the Benin bronzes, one of the things that is holding up the transfer, in addition to acknowledgement of, them being stolen and who owns them, but one of the things that is holding up the transfer is where they will go in Nigeria. There are modern museums of art in Nigeria, but of course, the Oba and the people who these artifacts are so spiritually relevant to wants to have them back in Benin. But now a lot of the European museum curators are wondering about the facilities, the security, temperature control, all of the things basically. Is there a big enough, nice enough, stable enough art museum to house these artifacts? Some people say that's not your problem. You let Benin do what they want to do with them. But one of the things is Oba Eware II is on a mission to build a massive art museum that is completely state of the art to house all of these Benin bronzes. So the same way that his predecessor, Eware I, patronized all of these artworks and built the city of Iya, Eware II has some major ambitions and just the energy of just give me my stuff back, which again, the astrology truly, truly points to that. And not only that, the thing that looking at that astrology and looking at the similarity of the names and the charts of the beginning of the reigns, I would posit to believe that Oba Eware II will do some things that maybe people think aren't possible or could not have been done over previous decades. He's got the same ambition as his predecessor. So now as we round the end, we get to the Imperial Benin Saturn-Jupiter conjunctions. And so what's fascinating in here is that we have, in the very beginning, with Eware the Great's first reign, we have this Saturn-Jupiter conjunction in 8 Cancer. This is where we get the city walls built and a lot of the Benin bronzes. We see the first Portuguese settlement moving in. And then, especially through Akenze, we have European trade truly beginning here in these 1600s. It started before, it really ramped up at that time when we get these Saturn-Jupiter conjunctions moving into fire.
Hey, Taylor, just wanted to give you a 10-minute warning. We can go a little bit over, but I just wanted to give you that in case so you can have it.
Nope, second to last slide. Thank you. Okay, so one of the fascinating things is so this is the second page. So basically, the way this chart is laid out is all of the Obas of Imperial Benin are here on this left side, their reign years, and then the Saturn-Jupiter conjunctions date and position and the corresponding events. So here, as we got to that pivotal turning point, that civil war in the Benin Empire, one thing I found very fascinating is at the beginning of it, really started to correspond with these conjunctions in Aries, the 6 Aries, these fire conjunctions. And so as we move there, what was even a stronger turning point, though, is that here, in 1850, when the British began petitioning to truly, violently invade and take over Nigeria, we had the first conjunction move from fire to earth here at 5 Virgo, but then the first time we were solidly, after that last fire, solidly in earth with 8 Capricorn, that is when this British petition begins. And so we see here, it begins here, and then here, this 1901, and the closest Jupiter-Saturn conjunction to that 1897 punitive expedition also takes place in this Capricorn energy here, which again is almost exactly opposing that inception Pluto in Cancer. And so there is something to be said for the shift from water to fire to earth in particular. When we get to this earth reign is where we truly see the acceleration of the decline and Europe coming in and fully taking over the Empire of Benin. This is just to leave you with an image of modern Benin City, Nigeria. And again, this is in the Edo state, but here we have the Grand Circle. It's a major highway that effectively is connecting all the different parts of Benin City and then leads centralizing to the Oba's Palace. But this is just so reminiscent to me of the layout of the city of Iya and that fractal design that you can just see the past in the present today. And that concludes my presentation.
Oh my God, that was so fascinating. Thank you so much. We have about 5 minutes, or actually 8 minutes, if you want to put a question in the Q&A box. I can answer them, but everybody was really nerding out about your presentation, and I was too. I love this stuff, and I don't know much about Africa astrology or history, and it was just so fascinating. People commented that there should be a series because, of course, there's just so much to learn. And the fractal information is so interesting. I have one Q&A. Let's see. What is the difference between slave trade then and now?
Then and now, as in now currently, or do you mean slave trade basically within Africa versus colonial, basically colonial American slavery?
She, she didn't say if you want to follow up, Darlene.
Okay. I'll give a
The second one, she said.
okay, there we go. So again, so effectively in, in West Africa, similar to other, let's say even places in Central America, other places where slavery exists around the world. So in West Africa, it was a bit more like indentured servitude or household slaves. So they were absolutely laborers that helped build all of these structures, of course. So there's the construction labor force, and more so like butlers and maids and types of things like that. The level of aggression, scale, and dehumanization that happened when the enslaved people were moved from the African continent to the European, to basically to North and South America, that was drastically different. So especially this idea of having this complete race-based sub underclass, and then a lot of the abuse that took place during that, and again the scale and the aggression, really the aggression level, that was just a very different treatment either side. That's a very concise, but that'd be another presentation.
Yes. I mean, that's what I mean. Like when you
Yeah.
approach something like this, I remember when I was doing some let me read the Q&A, but I remember doing research. I was wondering how you go about choosing what to present, but I want to ask a couple of the audience's questions first. The debate regarding Andrew writes, the debate regarding the return of art and artifacts. Of course, these items should rightfully be returned, but I'm wondering what your thoughts are on whether they should be returned immediately or if facilities should be in place to make sure the items are safe in proper atmospheric conditions, etc., should happen first.
Okay, in terms of my personal opinion, that's a good one. I basically think honestly, I'd love to have, yeah, I know like kind of on principle, a lot of some of the people of Benin want this art museum to be fully funded within Africa, to say that we don't need European handouts. We're not coming with a beggar bowl, and that's like I definitely agree with that. I think karmically, I would love for Europe to just pay for this facility. I honestly. Basically, I do tend to feel a little bit of what the OPA has said, where basically the artifacts existed in Benin for hundreds of years before these Western museums were invented. And so if they're solid enough to withstand and the people of Benin are willing to take the risk, it's theirs. Like I think it's not up to Western nations to determine the conditions for the return.
Why do you believe that African astrology has been ignored? This is the fascination. It is the oldest astrological study ever done. As a Black woman, it's been difficult to find anything. This is from Tanya.
Okay. Well, number one, I would say part of it, I believe, is kept secret intentionally. A lot of West African tradition is passed down orally, and a lot of things are sort of kept under the vest. As we know, a lot of times when things are, I mean, because there are connections between West Africa. I'm sure there are connections between West African and North African astrology that made its way to the West. But now a lot of North African and Arabian astrology is labeled as Western astrology. There's this co-opting that happens that sometimes we want to protect things from. I'd actually would love to basically get a grant to actually go there and speak to people and learn more about African astrology and West African cosmology. So number one, I'd say a lot of it just comes down to oral tradition and it not being necessarily published in written books because of the difference of how people live and exist. But number two, we just globally, there is just a constant devaluing of things that come from Africa. There's a lack of investment, a lack of research, a lack of people seeing the sophistication and thinking that things are worthy of the level of study and the level of intricacy that exists.
Okay, then the last question. What a coincidence. I'm Siraj from Addis, Ethiopia. I studied astrology with Adam Ellenbass. Taylor, what motivated you to do this research?
Ooh, that is a great question. I would say honestly, this is where I get into my more esoteric side. As I was continuing to do just personal ancestral work, and just actually the other thing too was that in 2021 I took a trip over with some family and visited Dakar, Senegal, and Accra in Ghana, and then in 2023 went to Nairobi, Kenya. And so I think physically being there, and I think there was just this feeling in me of, okay, I'm studying all this astrology and I'm hearing astrology from all these regions. I know that my ancestors were incredibly cosmic. Like I know that this connection with the heavens exists. And so there was just this sense of, where is that astrology? What is it? And then again, just wanting to shine a light on just the magnificence of these African empires and do that through the astrological lens.
Great. Taylor, everybody is just raving on and on about what a great presentation this was, and they are hungry for more. So keep going with your work. I'd love to see more as well. Thank you, everybody, for joining and participating on this Father's Day and summer solstice. And we hope you return. Thank you so much.
Thank you.